I remember the first time I saw her, not because she did anything extraordinary, but because something in me paused. It was a Tuesday at the end of May, the kind of day when the air starts to taste like summer, and the clouds seem to drift slower, lazier. As if they too know that school is almost over and the world is about to stretch open. She stood under the tall oak by the library steps, wearing a red windbreaker that didn't belong to the season, a book in her hand, her thumb tucked in at the spine like she was trying to hold the story together. Her eyes weren't on the pages though. They were following the wind, or the people, or maybe her thoughts. I don't know, but they weren't still, and that made me watch her longer than I meant to. We didn't speak that day. I walked past her like I had something urgent to do, even though I didn't. I just wasn't ready to make a moment out of a glance. Summer always felt like something suspended in time, like a breath the year held before it began again. That year, it felt different. Not heavier, not lighter, just ... possible. There was this lingering hum in the air, like something was about to start, and all you had to do was show up. And maybe I did, without realizing it. Because a week later, I saw her again, this time behind the community center, near the tennis courts. Sketching in a notebook while sitting on the curb, like the whole world was a pause button and she was fine living inside it. Her name was Mira. She told me that the first time we talked, which happened because her pencil broke, and I had one in my bag and offered it without thinking. She smiled like I'd handed her a secret. "Mira," she said, holding out her hand like we were old friends reuniting. "I'm 17. I like quiet mornings, loud music, and trying to draw things I can't explain." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I said, "I'm Theo. I hate algebra and small talk, and I have no idea what I'm doing this summer." She grinned. "Perfect. Then you're exactly who I was supposed to meet." From that moment on, we fell into each other like gravity. It wasn't dramatic, or instant, or loud. It was slow and natural, like the way dusk creeps in, without asking. We didn't go on dates. Not at first. We just kept running into each other in line for smoothies, at the used bookstore downtown, on the bus to the lake. And each time, it felt less like coincidence, and more like the universe trying to get our attention. Mira had this way of making the ordinary feel cinematic. She talked about people like characters, about places like they held magic under their sidewalks. When she listened, she tilted her head slightly, like tuning into a frequency no one else could hear. I told her once that I didn't believe in fate. She said, "That's okay. I believe enough for both of us." Life is short. But most people don't realize just how short until it's too late. June bloomed like a secret we were both learning how to keep. We started meeting up on purpose. She would bring a different sketchbook, each time, some filled with landscapes, others with faces that didn't exist except in her mind. I brought snacks, old headphones, and the kind of music you only share with someone when you want them to know who you really are. We spent hours lying in the park, watching clouds drift and naming them like they were old friends we had forgotten. She called one regret. I called another almost. She looked at me and said, "That's kind of beautiful. Like we're letting go of things just by naming them." I don't know when it shifted. Maybe it was the night we walked home in the rain, and she didn't run or cover her head but tilted her face up to the sky and smiled. Or maybe it was the moment she fell asleep next to me, on the grass, and her fingers brushed mine, and stayed there. Or maybe it was when she told me about her father, how he used to disappear for weeks at a time, and how her mother never cried but folded his clothes anyway. I didn't try to comfort her. I just listened. And that, she later told me, meant more to her than any words. By the end of June, we were inseparable. People started asking if we were together. We didn't know how to answer. There was no label, no rules, just long days that turned into longer nights, full of half-whispered dreams and shared silences. I wrote her poems I never showed her. She drew me into her notebooks, sometimes only parts, my hands, my eyes, the curve of my jaw. She said it was easier that way, to capture pieces of someone, than the whole. I wondered if that was how she saw the world, in fragments waiting to be held. One night, we ended up on the roof of the school gym, watching fireworks from the fairgrounds to towns over. They were small, barely visible, but she gasped every time like the sky was doing something just for us. I turned to say something stupid probably, but she kissed me first. It wasn't our first kiss, but it was the one that stayed with me, the one where time stopped pretending to be real. Afterward, she said, "I didn't plan that." And I said, "Good, me neither." I think that was the moment we both knew it was real. Not the kiss, but the silence afterward. The way we didn't have to say anything to understand everything. It was love, or the beginning of it, or the memory of something deeper we hadn't lived yet. And in that moment, we believed it would last forever. Not because we were naive, but because we wanted it to. We didn't talk about the end of summer, not even once. It felt like saying it out loud would make it real, so we pretended. We pretended that time didn't move, that the days weren't shrinking, that August wasn't waiting just around the corner with its suitcases and goodbye letters. We built a world where it was always July, always warm, always us. And maybe that was the most dangerous part, not the love, but the illusion. There's a kind of silence that lives in the middle of something beautiful, on unspoken agreement. That you don't ask questions when everything feels perfect, even if your heart is already quietly counting down. That was July. It wasn't just the heat or the long golden evenings, or the sound of crickets that hummed like a lullaby. It was the way everything felt suspended. Mira and I lived inside those days like we were borrowing time from a place where consequences didn't exist. Our routines turned into rituals: breakfasts by the riverbank, with peanut butter sandwiches and orange juice. Afternoons spent in the art room at the back of the library that the staff forgot to lock. Evenings on her front porch, with music so soft it felt like breathing. We didn't need to fill the silence, because the quiet between us had become a language, a kind of knowing. I began to learn her rhythms, the way she twirled her hair when she was thinking, the way she bit the inside of her cheek when she was nervous, the way her eyes drifted to the sky when she wanted to avoid a truth. She memorized me, too. She knew when I needed space before I said it, when I was pretending to be okay, and when my silences weren't peaceful, but heavy. She saw through me in ways I wasn't used to, ways that were terrifying and comforting at the same time. I started to write again. Not just poems, but long rambles I kept in a folder on my laptop. Letters I'd never send to her, thoughts too fragile to speak aloud. Sometimes I'd read her bits of them, disguised as stories or fiction, and she'd smile that half smile of hers that meant she knew exactly what I was doing. She never asked for more. She never pushed. She let me have my fear, the way I let her have her ghosts. There were things we didn't talk about, like how my parents were already packing for our move at the end of August, or how she sometimes stayed late at the park just to avoid going home. We didn't ask questions we didn't want answers to. Maybe because we were scared the truth would change things. Maybe because we already knew. One afternoon, the sky cracked open with one of those summer storms that arrives without warning, fast and loud and full of drama. We ran for cover under the awning of an abandoned gas station, laughing so hard I thought my chest would break. Her hair stuck to her forehead, her eyes were wild and alive, and in that moment, she looked at me like I was the most real thing in her world. "Tell me something you've never told anyone," she said suddenly, her voice barely louder than the rain. I hesitated. "I used to count how many people smiled at me each day," I said. "In middle school, I had this notebook, and I kept track. Like maybe if enough people smiled, I wouldn't feel so invisible." She didn't laugh. She just reached over, took my hand, and said, "I would have smiled at you every day." I didn't cry, not then, but something in me cracked open. I told her later that I loved her. It wasn't planned. It came out during a game of Truth or Dare we played on the rooftop of her apartment building. She dared me to tell her the truth about something I hadn't even admitted to myself. So I said it. "I love you." She looked at me for a long time, and I thought she wasn't going to say it back. But then she whispered, "I've been waiting to hear that since the vending machine pencil." We didn't need more words after that. We just lay there, shoulder to shoulder, looking up at the stars that we couldn't name but didn't need to. Everything felt infinite. Like we had pressed pause on the world and could stay there forever if we wanted to. But even forever has an expiration date when you're 17. The days started getting shorter. The breeze felt cooler. The light changed in that subtle way it always does at the end of July, when shadows start to stretch longer and you can't ignore the hint of endings anymore. My parents reminded me about the move more often. College emails began to arrive. Deadlines that had felt imaginary suddenly became real. And my Rushi began to draw more frantically, like she was trying to capture something before it slipped away. One evening, I found her sitting at our usual spot in the park, tearing pages out of her sketchbook and letting the wind take them. "Why are you doing that?" I asked, half alarmed. She shrugged. "Because I don't want them to become memories. I don't want to look at them in 5 years and wonder if I made it all up." I sat beside her and handed her the last page she'd dropped. "But they're real. This was real." She didn't say anything, just leaned her head against my shoulder and closed her eyes. We sat like that until it got too dark to see. We never talked about August, but it was coming anyway. August arrived, not with a thunderclap, but with quiet certainty. The days didn't announce their end, but you could feel it in the air, the way the sunlight shifted into something paler. The way people started talking about school again. The way summer itself seemed to step back, as if aware that it was overstaying its welcome. Mira and I pretended not to notice. We pretended in the way only young people in love can pretend, with full conviction and quiet desperation. We still met every day, still lay on the grass behind the library, like time hadn't moved since June. Still walked barefoot through sprinklers. Still traded secrets and stares like we were discovering each other for the first time. But beneath it all was something new. A tension neither of us wanted to name. The kind of tension that hums low like a wire stretched too far. Sometimes, I'd catch her staring into space, her pencil still, her eyes distant, and when I asked what she was thinking, she'd just say, nothing. But I knew. Because I was doing the same thing, counting the days in reverse, wondering how something so perfect could end just because a calendar page flipped. One evening, we sat at the edge of the lake, our feet in the water, the sky bruised with sunset. She said, "What if we just left?" I looked at her, unsure if she was serious. Left where? Anywhere. Just got on a bus and didn't look back. Her voice was soft, but there was something fierce behind it. We could live in a small town. You could write. I could paint murals on coffee shop walls. We'd eat pancakes at midnight and make up fake names and never tell anyone who we really were. I smiled because I wanted to believe it. And what happens when the money runs out? When we run out of pancakes? She looked at me then, really looked at me. Then we figure it out. Together. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The silence between us said it all that we wanted to believe in the fantasy. But the truth was already writing itself in the spaces we didn't fill. That night, we didn't kiss goodbye. She just pressed her forehead against mine and whispered, almost. I don't think I've ever heard a word sound so full of love and sadness at the same time. The next few days were like glass, beautiful, fragile, and filled with reflections we couldn't hold on to. We went back to all our favorite places. The bookstore with the creaky floorboards. The ice cream shop where she always ordered 2 flavors and made me finish the one she didn't like. The rooftop where she first kissed me during the fireworks. At each place, we left behind something, a drawing, a note, a small part of ourselves. Like maybe if we scattered enough pieces, we could follow them back to each other someday. On the last Friday of summer, we stayed up all night. No destination, no plan. We walked through the sleeping town, hands intertwined, whispering our favorite memories like a prayer. She said she loved the way I always waited an extra second before crossing the street, just in case. I told her I loved the way she always hummed when she tied her shoes. We laughed about things that weren't funny, cried without trying to hide it. At dawn, we ended up at the train tracks, sitting on the gravel, watching the sky turn from navy to lavender. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook, one I hadn't seen before. I made this for you, she said. Inside were sketches. Of me, of us. Of places we'd been. Moments I didn't even realize she'd captured. And on the last page, in tiny, careful handwriting, if you ever wonder if it was real, it was, and if you ever wonder if I loved, why did, always. I didn't know what to say, so I kissed her. The kind of kiss that tastes like endings. The kind you try to memorize because you know you won't get another. I nodded, afraid my voice would break. We stayed there until the sun was fully up, until the world remembered it was supposed to move again, and then she said, "It's time." I walked her home. Not because I had to, but because I needed to. Because every step was a goodbye I wasn't ready to say. At her door, she turned and smiled. We had a summer. the best one. She touched my cheek. Then don't ruin it by trying to make it something it wasn't. Let it be enough. And then she was gone. The next day, I left, packed my things, sat in the car with my parents as they drove us away from everything familiar. I stared out the window, holding the notebook she gave me, and tried not to look back. But I did. Of course I did. Because you always look back at your first love. Even when you swear you won't. It's strange what you remember. Not the goodbyes, not the last words or the final looks, or even the moment you drove away, but the little things. The way the screen door creaked when Myra stepped outside. The exact shade of blue the sky turned just before dusk in late July. The smell of oranges on her fingers, because she always peeled them during our walks. I don't remember what I wore that last day, or what song was playing in the background, or what I said when my mom asked if I was okay. But I remember Mira's laugh when she almost dropped her sketchbook in the lake. The way she whispered almost like it was a secret, and how her hair always smelled faintly of paint and mint gum. I carried those fragments with me, across state lines. Into new classrooms and colder mornings, into apartments where no one knew my name. I tried to tell myself I'd let her go. That she was a chapter bright and fleeting, and already finished. But the truth is, some stories never really end. They just get quieter. College wasn't what I expected. It was louder, faster, filled with people who smiled too wide and talked too much and seemed to already know who they were. I went through the motions classes, essays, parties I left early, roommates I didn't quite connect with. I dated a girl who loved photography and had freckles across her nose. She liked jazz and rainy days and said "I love you" like she meant it, and I tried to mean it back. But love isn't something you can force into new shapes. It has its own language, and sometimes it only speaks once. I never told her about Mira. Not really. Just said, there was someone, a long time ago. And she never pushed. Maybe because she saw it in my eyes, that part of me was still back in a summer that refused to fade. I started writing more. Not just poems and half-finished novels, but real stories. Stories about lost things, about people who almost made it, about places that felt like people, and people who became places. I wrote about a girl who painted memories, about a boy who tried to hold on to time. My professors liked the work. They called it nostalgic, evocative, vulnerable. They didn't know it was real. Years passed in a blur of seasons. Graduation, jobs, apartments that changed as often as my coffee preferences. Life, in all its messy, relentless forwardness. And still, she lingered. Not as a wound, but as a pulse. A rhythm beneath the noise. I saw her sometimes in strangers who moved like her. In songs that echoed her laugh. In street art that reminded me of her sketches. Once, I walked into a bookstore downtown and froze. Because someone had drawn a mural on the back wall, a field of stars, and in the middle, a girl holding a paper airplane. It wasn't hers. I knew that. But my heart didn't. It beat so loud I had to sit down. I wondered then where she was, what she was doing, if she still drew, if she ever thought of me when the leaves turned gold. I never reached out. Maybe out of fear. Maybe out of respect for the version of us that existed untouched. Because sometimes, going back breaks the magic. And I wanted to believe in it still. Then, 5 summers later, I got a letter. It came in a plain envelope, with no return address, just my name in handwriting I hadn't seen in years, but recognized instantly. Inside was a postcard. On the front a pencil sketch of the lake where we first kissed, done in that same, soft, effortless style that had once filled her notebooks. On the back, 4 words. I kept the summer. No explanation, no signature, just that. And it wrecked me. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Because it felt like someone breathing life back into something I'd folded away too neatly. I sat with it for hours, tracing the lines of the drawing, reading the message over and over. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't an invitation. It was a promise. That we hadn't imagined it. That it mattered. That it still did. That night, I walked out into the city, looking for something I couldn't name. I ended up at a park I didn't know, sat on a bench under flickering lamplight. And for the first time in years, I let myself remember without editing. I remembered her laugh, her fire, her softness, her mess. I remembered who I was, with her. And who I'd been trying to be, ever since. I think that's the thing about first love, it becomes a mirror. Not just of who you were, but of everything you hoped to be. Mira was never just a girl I loved. She was a map, a compass, a spark that lit every page I've written since. And maybe that's why I never needed to find her again. Because she never really left. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed. If we'd fought harder. If we'd dared to believe in something more than a summer. But then, I remember her voice. Soft and sure. Let it be enough. And maybe it was. Maybe it is. Not all love stories are meant to last forever, but some are meant to shape you. To break you open, so the light can get in. To remind you of who you are when no one's watching. That was us. A moment too big for time. A love too honest to survive the real world. But real all the same. And every year, when the days start to stretch long, and the air smells like grass and memory, I feel her. Not as a ghost. Not as a regret. But as a heartbeat in the background of everything I am. Because we had a summer. And that summer had us. And that's enough. Time has a strange way of folding in on itself. Some moments stretch so long you think they'll never end, and others collapse into the space between 2 heartbeats. Years passed. Not quickly, not slowly, just steadily, the way rivers carve stone. I moved cities, changed jobs, grew into someone I wasn't sure the summer version of myself would recognize. I stopped counting the days since I last saw her, not because I forgot, but because it stopped feeling useful. Life wasn't waiting anymore. It was moving. But even in the movement, she was there. Mira existed in the negative space of my life, the pause between sentences, the silence between songs, the breath before a kiss. I didn't chase her memory, but I didn't shut the door on it either. She had become part of my rhythm. Like a favorite line in a poem you never quite quote aloud, but always carry in your mind. One September evening, nearly 7 years after that last summer, I found myself in a small coastal town for a writer's retreat. The kind of place with more trees than people, and the kind of quiet that makes you listen to yourself too closely. The air smelled like salt and pine, and the inn had a porch with crooked steps and tea that tasted faintly of orange blossom. I came to finish a manuscript. I ended up finding something else, or rather, someone. It started with a painting, a mural, to be exact, on the side of a bakery that sold scones warm enough to fog the glass. The mural was impossible to miss, a cascade of paper cranes flying into a twilight sky, each one detailed with tiny drawings that told a different story. There was something familiar in the lines, in the motion, in the delicate defiance of the colors. I stood there for 10 minutes, unmoving. When the owner came out, she smiled and said, "Beautiful, isn't it? Local artist, quiet type, keeps to herself, but brilliant." I didn't ask her name. I didn't need to. That evening, I walked to the gallery down the street. Not a fancy one, just a converted barn that smelled of cedar and paint. And there she was. Not Mira, not yet. But her work, framed sketches, layered canvases, art that bled with memory. And on one wall, a piece I recognized, us, on the rooftop, the night of the fireworks. Her lines were gentler now, more refined, but the feeling raw, electric, impossibly real hadn't changed. I stood in front of it for what felt like hours. And then I heard her voice. "You still cross the street with that one extra second." My heart stopped. I turned, and there she was. Not a memory, not a dream. Just Mira, older, softer, around the edges, but still her. Her eyes held the same storms. Her smile was still that impossible mix of brave and sad. I didn't know what to say. So I said the only thing I could. "You kept the summer." She smiled. "So did you." We didn't rush into conversation. We sat outside the gallery on a bench beneath a string of lights and let the silence do most of the talking. Eventually, we filled in the blanks. Where we'd been, who we'd become. She'd moved around a lot, painted for schools, cafes, sometimes just for herself. Never stayed in one place too long. "I liked the idea of always being a little unfinished," she said. I told her I understood, that writing felt the same way. Like chasing smoke. We laughed about old things, the librarian, who always gave us side eyes. The way we used to rank ice cream flavors, how we once spent an entire night arguing over which star was the brightest. We didn't talk about why we didn't find each other sooner. We didn't need to. Some distances aren't meant to be filled. They're meant to be honored. The next day, she invited me to her studio. It was a sunlit room above an old bookstore, filled with canvases and paper and color. Everything smelled like her citrus, and pine, and something I could never name but always knew. She showed me her new work, and I showed her my half-finished manuscript. It was, unsurprisingly, about two people who fell in love one summer and never quite left it. She read it in silence, and when she finished, she closed the laptop gently and said, "You remembered everything." I didn't tell her that remembering her had been the easiest thing I'd ever done. We spent a week together. Not in the fevered rush of youth, but in something slower, quieter, deeper. We made tea in the mornings. Took long walks through the pine trails. She taught me how to mix watercolors. I taught her how to skip stones properly this time. We didn't talk about the future. We didn't label anything. We just existed, to people who had once known each other completely and were now learning how to do it all over again. On the last night, we sat on the roof of her building, wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars rise above the ocean. She leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Do you think we get more than one great love?" I thought about it. About all the years we'd spent apart. About the people we became in the time we weren't looking for each other. And I said, "I think if we're lucky, we get to meet the same love twice." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. When I left the next morning, we didn't say goodbye. Just hugged for a long time, her hand holding mine like a tether. I got into my car, the ocean disappearing in the rear-view mirror. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was leaving anything behind. Because some people are not meant to stay in one summer, one town, or one memory. Some people are meant to find you again, when the timing is kind, when the story is ready. I returned to the city with the quiet weight of something that had shifted not loudly, not all at once. But like the way the seasons change, a slow warmth creeping into cold places, a lightness where there used to be ache. Life resumed, as it always does, with emails and deadlines and the scent of early autumn threading through open windows. But something inside me had softened. Not out of sadness or longing, but from the recognition that some stories, even when they end, leave you more whole than broken. Myra and I didn't promise anything. No dramatic declarations, no plans to move cities or stitch our lives back together across time. What we had in that week was enough. A chapter rewritten with the care we lacked the first time. A gentler echo of a love that never really left the room. We didn't need more, because finally, we understood what it meant to love without needing to hold. There's a beauty in that. In knowing someone so completely that their absence never feels empty, only quieter. The manuscript I finished during that week, the one she read before I ever admitted how scared I was to let anyone into those pages, was published the following spring. It did well, better than I expected. People wrote to me saying how it reminded them of someone they once knew, a place they once left, a summer they could still taste when they closed their eyes. I never told them it was all real. I never had to. Because when a story is written from truth, it hums. It speaks in a language older than words. And Mira had always been that truth. Not just the girl I loved, but the moment I understood what it meant to feel fully alive. She didn't come to the book launch. She sent a small box instead. Inside, a tiny sketch of a paper airplane mid-flight, and a note that read, "Every line was a memory. You remembered beautifully." After that, we kept in touch. Not constantly, not intensely, just enough. A call in winter, when the snow felt too heavy. A postcard in July, with a scribbled still, painting the skies. Once, we met for coffee in a city neither of us lived in. We walked for hours, sharing stories of people we'd loved and lessons we'd carried. There was no urgency, no regret, just presence. Two people who had learned how to hold space for the past while living fully in the present. I told her once, over chamomile tea and distant thunder, that I didn't believe in forever the way I used to. She smiled and said, "That's because you finally lived long enough to know that moments matter more," and she was right. Because forever isn't about time. It's about weight. Some memories stay heavier than years. Some silences say more than paragraphs. Some summers outlive even the people who lived them. Myra never stopped being my muse. Even after the pages stopped being about her. Even after I wrote stories set in cities she never saw, about people she never knew. She remained a thread in every character who dared to feel too deeply, in every line that dared to name what most hearts only whisper. I used to think she had ruined me for other loves. But that wasn't true. She just taught me how to recognize real ones. To wait for the quiet kind, the brave kind, the kind that doesn't burn you out, but warms you through. I fell in love again, eventually. Not in the way movies show it, not in sparks and chaos, but in steadiness, in comfort, in late-night grocery runs, and shared playlists and hands that always knew where mine were. And when I told her about it, Myra expected something I couldn't name. But all she said was, "I'm glad he found you." That's who she was. The kind of person who doesn't ask to be chosen again, but is grateful to have once been. We lost touch slowly. Not from hurt, but from peace. Like the way trails fade into wildflowers. Like the way the tide never apologizes for leaving the shore. She wrote less. I traveled more. We stopped exchanging birthdays, but somehow she always sent a small note on the anniversary of the day we first met. "Still here," she'd write, or "remembering the rooftop," or once, just a sketch of two chairs facing a lake. The last I heard from her was 5 summers ago. A letter with no date, no return address. Just ink smudged by rain and a single line. "Even if the story ends here, you were the part I underlined twice." I cried when I read it. Not because it hurt, but because it felt like closing a book you didn't know you needed until the very last page. I never replied. I didn't have to. Some echoes are meant to linger. Now, whenever I pass a rooftop lit by string lights, or see someone drawing alone in a cafe window, or hear the hum of August crickets just before sleep, I think of her. Not as a lost love, not as a what if, but as a chapter that taught me everything I now know about loving well and letting go with grace. We had a summer. And that summer had us. We forgot to leave, not because we didn't know how, but because we didn't want it to end. And in a way, it never did. Because the truth is, some people come into your life to stay. Not beside you, not in front of you, but within you. In the way you see the world. In the way you hold others. In the way you become. And that's where the story ends. And doesn't